Black. I woke up early the next morning and the sun was out full. Sabrina was too scared to sleep out alone. She spent the night with my mother in her bed. The two of them were still asleep under the covers. I got dressed and grabbed a ball without making a peep. Then I headed down to the circle. It wasn't even 8 o'clock yet. The first handful of players usually don't show up until after 9, but I was glad to be out there by myself. I found a flat piece of ground where I could put the ball down and it wouldn't roll off. Then I went out to the center of the court and started to stretch. I closed my eyes, leaning all the way back. For a second, everything was black. Then the orange light came pouring underneath my eyelids. I could feel the warm sun on my face. I was a million miles away from the gym the night before. My mind was clear and focused on everything in front of me. I flipped the ball through the rim with my right hand and caught it in my left. I kept going back and forth between hands, putting up little shots. I had a good rhythm going, and as soon as the ball hit my hands, it was back up in the air again. I started moving around the court, taking shots. I'd take it off with a burst of speed, then throw off the brakes. I was going fast and slow at the same time, moving inside and out. I worked up a real sweat that rolled down my face and dropped to the ground. I didn't expect to see Eddie. There was just too much going on for him to play out here. Other guys started showing up one by one. When you got enough bodies, they chose up sides. I heard my name get called first. After that, it didn't matter to me. I figured out the sides on our first trip up court. I saw who was turning towards me and who was facing the other way. It was an okay game. A lot of players who are just so-so show up early to get their licks in before the circle gets too tough. But I wasn't holding back an inch. I was blowing by kids like they were standing still. Nobody on the other team wanted to guard me. My squad won the first 3 games, and I didn't slow down a beat. The next team was coming onto the court when I saw Moses the next walk into the park. I was waiting for them to say something about the night before, but they both sat at the end of the bench looking at me like they'd let me down for everything. I thought that maybe something else had jumped off after I left. That maybe something bad had happened to Eddie Casey. It went right by me the first time Moses said the team got beat. I had to reach back and put the words to the look on their faces. I couldn't believe it, but it didn't seem important enough anymore to stress about either. Win or lose, nothing was any different for me. Only the playoffs were over. I walked onto the court and made the first 3 baskets of the new game. My squad had point game at 14-6. That's when I saw Rose at the edge of the park. She was standing between buildings watching me play. I told X to take my spot and walked off. The kids on my team made a fuss about me leaving and were calling after me. Rose put a hand out in front of her for me to stay, but I didn't pay attention to any of it. I grabbed Rose's hands and we walked out of the circle together. Rose asked me about my mother and sister. I told her they got through the night in one piece. After we got past what Miss Randolph did and the team lost, we didn't mention either one of those things again. I just wanted to come out and see you play, she said. We went through the block one time, then turned up toward the Steinway Street. I held onto Rose's hand all the way until she pointed to show me something in a store window. After that, I just settled for walking with her shoulders next to mine. Rose said she didn't think her parents would let her take the bus upstate to visit. I told her I'd have to write her letters instead. She smiled at me and said she'd answered them all. Then Rose asked me if I thought Eddie was going to jail too. He's innocent until somebody proves different in court, I said. That can be hard to do sometimes. On the way back, Rose turned inside a flower shop and I followed in behind her. She smelled lots of different flowers and I put my nose to every one she did. Rose brought a dozen red roses. The salesman wrapped the stems in silver paper. Rose handed them to me with the water still dripping out from the bottom. I carried them all the way home for her. On the corner of Rose's block, I tried to hand her back the bouquet, but she just laughed at me and said, "They're for your mother, Marcus," to make up for the one she didn't get last night. Rose kissed me goodbye and started for her house. Then she turned back around and caught me watching her from behind. And the sunlight shined in her eyes when she smiled at me. My mother loved the roses, but I couldn't take credit for them and told her they were from Rose. Most of that night I thought about Rose. I thought about what it would be like to hold her tight and kiss her for real. I dreamed she was lying in my arms, soft and warm. My mother said that I should go back to church with her and Sabrina. I really didn't want to, but I didn't want to let her down anymore either. I hadn't been to church since the Christmas I started high school. That's when my mother told me I was old enough to make up my own mind about going and old enough to stay home alone on Sunday morning. Reverend Hawkins was the only preacher I ever knew. He'd been there since I was born and even baptized me. He remembered my father growing up, too. Sometimes he'd tell me stories about the kids who hung out on the church corner in the old days. My father was one of them. I got 2 phone calls from my father since he had left. Both of them were on my birthday. The first time my mother just handed me the phone. She whispered who it was to me so my sister wouldn't hear. My father had the deepest voice I'd ever heard. I told him about playing ball in junior high. Before I knew it, he was saying goodbye. 2 years ago he called again, only I picked up the phone myself. He said, "Marcus, this is your father." He told me how I could tell how I was growing up by the sound of my voice. I talked about getting a scholarship and turning pro one day. He said he wasn't surprised I was going to be somebody. He never said out loud he loved me, so I didn't go there either, but the call still felt like he was right there with me. Reverend Hawkins had passed away since the last time I went to the church. The new reverend was from Guyana. His accent was thick, and I couldn't understand half of what he was saying during the service. Maybe a lot of people couldn't, or it just took some practice hearing him. I mostly paid attention to the light coming through the stained glass windows. The same sky could be red, yellow, or green depending on where you looked. I hardly ever prayed, but I asked God to look after my mother and sister while I was away upstate. And I put in a word for Jefferson and everything he did for me. After the service, my mother needed to go food shopping, so we walked down to the Seatown supermarket. Sabrina still got a kick out of seeing the big plaster animals on the roof. They had a white chicken with red feathers and a black and brown cow staring down at you. There used to be a giant pig too, but it got blown off in a storm, and the store never got it fixed. Sabrina ran to get her own cart to push. She was making car noises with it and racing up and down the aisle. I was going slow, pushing the cart while my mother dropped groceries into it. Then I challenged Sabrina to a race. She was ahead of me, but I was going to let her win from the start. She turned the corner too fast and almost ran into some old man. I was far back enough to look like I had nothing to do with it, but my mother threw a fit at the both of us anyway and made Sabrina get rid of her cart. We turned down the last aisle and came out by the checking lines. I was the first one to see it coming. They were heading towards us at the same time we were moving to them. "Sweet Jesus, I don't want this today," my mother cried up from the ceiling. Eddie's mother was pushing the shopping cart. Eddie and his father were walking a step or two behind her. Everyone just froze where they were for a second. It was like the negatives of some picture that somebody put away and forgot about, with us in black and them in white. We would be 10 feet apart from each other. I looked Eddie in the face and then my mother. Before anybody could move, my mother asked Eddie, "Isn't that my son's jacket you borrowed? From when yours got stolen that night?" Eddie looked down at the jacket over his chest and arms. His father moved over to stand in front of his mother. "Make sure to return it real soon," my mother said. "Marcus won't be with us too much longer. He's going to prison, you know." Eddie put his hands up around the zipper, but my mother grabbed Sabrina by the arm and rolled the carts away. Eddie brought his eyes up and stared at me like he didn't know what he could do. I wanted to say something and even started to move my lips, but I couldn't find any words that made sense. I put my hands in my pockets and followed after my mother. The rest of the day, I could see that the speech she gave Eddie flying around in my mother's head. She was doing housework with a real attitude. The words were going back and forth inside of her. Sometimes her lips would move without making a sound. Only this time, that speech was longer, and maybe somebody had something to say back to her. A couple of times, one or two of the words popped out of her mouth, but she'd jerk her body in a different direction to close the lid tight again. I saw the scrub brush sitting in the bathroom, and thought about my one day cleaning toilets on Rikers Island. I could hear my mother working hard in the kitchen and felt ashamed. I didn't want the next toilet I cleaned to belong to the state, so I picked up the brush and started at ours. Both Jefferson and Connolly were missing from the front desk at school on Monday. I asked one of the other school safety officers what happened. He said both of them were transferred to a different office building run by the Board of Vacation until all the charges got sorted out. Some kid at the game was charging Connolly with assault. Connolly was pressing charges against Jefferson for hitting him. For now, neither one of them was allowed to be around kids in a school. I felt bad for Jefferson getting a rap like that, and having to prove he didn't do anything wrong. Maybe he took an extra hard swipe at Connolly, but that bastard deserved it. I wanted to go down to where Jefferson was and tell somebody in charge all the good things he ever did for kids. Then I'd probably have to say I was going to jail for pulling a stick up, and nobody would believe me anymore.